to the Next Chapter Book Club Kids Edition by Shelley Legal. My name is Lydia Shelley, and I'm the principal of Shelley Legal, and I'm so happy that you could join us. The Next Chapter Book Club Kids Edition will look at several children's books that parents can read to their children to help them create their own family divorce story. Divorce is the most important story that parents will tell their children when families experience separation. What parents say, when they say it, and how they say it will impact on children's mental health, their relationships with themselves and their parents. Children are impacted by their parents' separation, even when the separation is amicable. Little people often experience big emotions. It is very common for children to experience anger, shame, loneliness, guilt, and grief. In this episode, we are speaking to Bronny Lane, the Australian author of My Super Single Dad. Bronny also runs Little Train Creative, an agency that provides marketing, filmmaking and content creation for the arts community. And in 2014, she co-wrote and produced the comedy show Fart Lab. Bronny was also a single parent and is now a stepmom in a blended family. This book celebrates all the super single dads out there in a very Australian way. Today we're talking to the amazing Bronny Lane. She's written a whole series of kids' books. This is one of my favourites. If you can see it here, My Super Single Dad. She's also written My Super Single Mum. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to pop that up here. Hopefully you can still see it. Thank you for speaking to us today, Bronwyn. I just want to have a chat with you. How did you come up with the idea of the Super Single Parent books, if I can call it that?
Sure. Well, when I was pregnant, I would go into Big W and then I'd go to the cheap book section and all the kids' books, and I'd be looking for kids' books that were relevant to single parent situations because I was actually pregnant and alone and knew I'd be having my daughter as a single mother. And I was looking for books that were relevant to what was going to be our family situation.
Your family story.
Yeah, and there really was nothing. So then I had my daughter and, on my usual trundle through Big W to get nappies and formula and whatever else it was that I needed, baby wipes. I'd go over to the book section with my little bubba and still no books. There was a lot of, mum, dad, 2.5 kids and the white fence, but there was no just mum and their child. So me being me, I decided I should write the book. And I just kept having this idea of my super single mum. Like, I'm a super single mum. There's lots of super single mums. And I was thinking my mother was a super single mum. And I was thinking that's the book. It's My Super Single Mum. And it's like a superhero to the little child. Mum's a superhero because she just does everything. I would get to my apartment and I lived up a flight of stairs and I'd be lugging baby and bags and all sorts of stuff, and I'd have to go up and down, up and down, up and down. And, many times when she was a baby, I'd think, I'm a rock star. I am a super single mum. I was 100% on my own. Didn't have a lot of support. My best friend was very supportive, as was my mother. But most of the time I was on my own. So I started writing the book, and it just sort of came, like everything that I write that tends to be well received, it came very naturally. I just wrote it and it was really nice, and I got other people to read it and they loved it, and then I decided that I would turn it into a book.
So how, though, from the moment you thought about this book in Big W, which parents been in that book section at Big W, or how long did the process take between you standing in that aisle to you writing the book and having it published?
Probably 18 months, because I had the thought and then I had the baby, and then I'm what I call a percolator. What kind of writer I am. So I'll have an idea and it could take anywhere from 3 to 18 months to 7 years for me to realise that idea, to turn it into a piece of writing. A perfect example is actually I just wrote a dramatic screenplay based on the death of my brother, and that my brother died in 2010, and I wrote a personal essay in 2010, and it's taken me 10 years. I always knew I'd turn it into a play or a screenplay or something based on the essay, and it's taken me 10 years to do that.
You recently posted a link to that essay, and what I loved about that piece of writing was that it was written in a very vulnerable way, and we often don't, at least in the West, I find, we don't speak about grief. We don't talk about grief when a relationship ends. We don't acknowledge it. We don't acknowledge when somebody that we're close to and love passes. We don't seem to speak about it openly.
No.
So was it difficult, right, from a ability? No, that's okay.
No, it's because people are scared. They think death is catching. They think you can catch death or illness or bad friendships. That's why people stay away, because they don't want to get touched by the bad stuff. So, and that's why they don't talk about it. And I remember after my brother died, I'd go to events. How you going? And I was honest. I feel bad. I feel awful. Oh, so they stopped inviting me because I was no fun, because I was grieving. So I absolutely think that it's a hard conversation to have. And, really all people need you to say when you're grieving is, I'm so sorry. I really am so sorry. And I know I can't take away your pain, but I'm here. Yeah, I can't take away your pain. Like the grief of, I know people that have, grieved very hard for the loss of a marriage, unable to let go. And that, this is why people end up in court for years, because one person can't let go. They're actually grieving. They're in the anger phase of grief. That those stages of grief are very real. And I actually think that with relationship breakdowns, that it's not recognized. People go, oh, they broke up, they got a divorce. They're grieving. These people are grieving. Anger is a part of grief. Finally, you get to acceptance, and then you learn to live with it. You're never the same, but you're changed. Sometimes you change for the better.
That's right. And even the most amicable relationships, when they break down, there's always going to be an element of anger or grief, even in the most amicable relationships. And this is where this idea about divorce being the most important story that separated parents will tell their children, because it has such a huge impact on how a child views themselves, how they view their relationships with other people. So that's why I love your books, because you're actually representing a single parent household in a very positive and normal way, but not even normal, go one step better, I think, in terms of that superhero idea, which all kids love. My 3-year-old is obsessed with superheroes at the moment. So there's lots of jumping from couches, unfortunately, but that's your book. And going back to when you were standing in the aisle of Big W and you couldn't find anything, do you think that there's more of a recognition now of the importance of the divorce story on children?
Yeah. So since 10 years later, let's fast forward, 10 years later, once upon a time you'd type in super single mum and only my book would come up in Google. Now you can type in super single mum and it's become a phrase that's used regularly in the media. There's lots of books about super mums. There's even, I think, a couple of books out there that even use the word super single mum, whatever. I even saw... I can't bother paying the lawyers.
About this super single dad, though, I'm just going to get it back here.
Yeah.
About this little one is that it's probably the first time I've seen single dads being represented in such a positive and quite humorous, almost in the vein of the dad joke kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Time that I've ever seen it. And I think it's great because not only is it the first time I've seen it, and I'm an avid reader of children's books because I have 2 boys that are just book mad, but it's the first time I've definitely seen it in Australia as well, which I think has you have a very unique way of writing, and it's not something that I've seen from, for example, authors from the UK or the US. So how important, in your view, is it that dads are represented in a really playful, humorous way, and single dads is that?
Yeah, 100%. Single dads should be as recognised as single mothers, because even though people basically assume, oh, the dads rack off and they don't want to be with their children, that's not the case at all. Dads are just as invested in their kids. they just as much as the mum want access. And I actually think it's a real shame in Australia that the automatic separation isn't 50-50. I think it's a shame because there's plenty of normal families who break up just because people grow apart or things happen, and they decide that being together isn't the healthiest environment for the children. It's actually a really brave decision to make. But I just sort of saw that there was nothing for dads, and I knew lots of I've met lots of great single dads, really nice guys who just, it just didn't work for whatever reason, and very amicable and, get along well with their ex-wife. And
about that comment, lots of great single dads, be careful. Your inbox.
Well, not now, not since I remarried. I do still know lots of great single dads.
What I love most, this is my favourite page. I'm just going to show this gorgeous illustration here. And this is my favourite page. It says, I love Daddy's barbecues, but he always burns the chops. Daddy says, that's okay. Burnt chops are tops.
Yeah, that's my favourite too.
And you have a really interesting story about the illustrator and how you guys met as well.
Yeah. So, a long time ago, before all of this, I was actually one of the first fashion bloggers globally, which is kind of nice. I was basically working at a place called Lonely Planet Publications, which is a travel book company. And the person that I was in a relationship with noticed that I loved clothes, and that people were always borrowing my clothes and ringing me to ask for advice on my clothes and what they should wear to things. And girlfriends would come around and I'd style them up, and then they'd go off to their event. And he said to me, "You're Ask Bronny." He said, "That's what you are. You're Ask Bronny." So on Christmas Day, he actually gave me the website Ask Bronny. And what happened was I went looking for illustrators, and there's a great website. Don't know if it's around anymore, but it was called Lost at E Minor, and it had all these amazing illustrators from all over the world. And I decided that I wanted to use illustrations on this website rather than women posing, because I wanted it to be for all women, that no matter, it's a bit similar to my kids' books actually, that no matter your shape, size, ethnicity, that, you were beautiful just the way you are, and that actually we're a canvas, and the way we dress ourselves, you look beautiful, by the way, the way we dress ourselves is, a reflection of our artistry and how we perceive the world, and, those sorts of things. So I ran Ask Bronny for about 10 years, and I used to get fashion questions from all over the world, and the website was really popular, and I was one of the first fashion bloggers to be invited to Fashion Week, and I got invited to Paris Fashion Week and New York Fashion Week, and
You've always been a writer.
Yes, yeah, and I did fashion, so I was writing all during that period. I'd go to shows and I'd come back and I'd write all about the show, and, ruffles are in. So I guess, I've always been writing. Even before that, I was working in marketing, in the arts, and every Friday I used to do this email newsletter. In fact, Vibe was the first of its kind in the world. It was a youth arts program. I actually won a Churchill Fellowship for that. But again, writing. I changed the way we write for young people in the arts. I was in my 20s and I said to my boss, "You've got to make the arts cool." I said, "Nobody wants to come because they don't think it's cool." I said, "But if they knew that The Marriage of Figaro was all about some guy being unfaithful to his wife, they'd probably come and see it." And she said, "Oh, well, what do you suggest?" I said, "Well, you need a membership for people to feel comfortable." She said, "I'll go away and tell me how that would work." I said, "All right." I was actually studying at university at the time as well. I had a part-time job in uni. So I went off and I came up with this concept of an arts program that was to get young people into the arts. And a part of it was how you write. I said, you've got to write like a young person. This is how we write for young people. So I basically took this idea of how you write for young people and I put that into how we talk to young people in the arts, and created a website, did events. In the end, we ended up with a venue that was specifically for young people at the Art Centre. In fact, the Opera House came down and interviewed me. What would you do next? They said. I said, I'd have a television show. I said, I bet they went and did my TV show. You could have asked me to come and run it. Yeah, well, this was sort of more for the 18 plus market, making the arts cool. And but absolutely. And it's always been writing. I'm a classically trained musician, but even as a kid, I was either writing or playing the piano or playing basketball. It was, writing has always been there. I remember I was out in the garden one day, I would have been about 13, and I was looking at the roses.
Mm-hmm.
And I went in and I wrote this creative essay, gave it to my mother and she cried. And then she gave it to her friends and they all cried. And they were saying, she's really got something there. She's really talented. And my mother was saying, my mother was like, oh, yes, no, she's talented. But I think my mother always sort of thought that I would do music, and that's sort of always what I was going to do. But even as a little kid, a little preppy in in prep and grade 1, I used to make these frog books and I'd cut out the frog shape and then I'd write the frog story. So I've really been, and then I remember getting sent to the principal's office to show my frog book. So, I've always been writing. I can pull out folders from, I keep these folders and I've written dreadful poetry, but, writing nonetheless. And, I've started writing screenplays and sort of gotten halfway through and stopped. And so I think it was just always my trajectory to be writing, and as a career was probably always going to happen.
And your mum, you've spoken a little bit about what a huge impact she's had on you. She was also a single mum, wasn't she?
Yeah, my mother is my superhero. She's an amazing woman. I remember things like, we didn't have money, and she would go off and referee basketball at night and I'd look after my little brother. But I remember in the middle of winter and freezing cold in Ballarat, and we had this little wooden bridge, and if you didn't back out of the driveway across the wooden bridge the right way, you could slip off because of the ice. Wow. And I remember it slipping off, the car slipping off, and her getting in and jacking it up and stick the bricks in, she's saying to me, and I'll put the bricks in, and and then she's like, stand over there, and then she was incredible. I remember she put a fence up and she had people come and help, but I remember her with the crowbar and she's digging the holes, and God, she's an incredible woman. She went back to university as a mature age student and studied social work and all sorts of things, and she went to Exeter on exchange and just amazing things. I can't even think how old she would have been, I guess, late 50s. And, now she works with children and she's a counsellor. When she retired, she started her counselling business. So, she's a big inspiration to me, even just seeing how she was, after my brother died. A lot of people could just sink into a deep depression, and, she'd lost a child, but she grieved, she still grieves. But just how she, as a mother myself, I just think she's a really incredible, inspiring person.
I can't imagine the pain that would be associated and the grief that would be associated with losing a child that I can't comprehend. I don't think anyone can unless it's happened to you.
Yeah.
I don't possibly.
No, that's right. And I guess the difference with when I lost my brother was that my mother and I made decisions about him together. So she would come to me and say, oh, he's being bullied at school, for example. And I would say to her, you've got to get him out of that school. Just take him out of the school. It doesn't matter. Who says he has to stay at that school? He doesn't have to stay at that school. Find a better school. And that was a decision we made together. He went to a smaller school and he had a great time. Did very well there at that smaller school. And then when he went back to high school, and of course there the bullies were all waiting, and just horrific again. And so, we talked about it again and decided he'd go to boarding school, and much better experience at boarding school. Just, I don't know why it was like that. It just was that we kind of made all our decisions together, and I felt very responsible for him because, my mother was working and I was the nanny in a way. I mean, not really. I'm his sister. I was his sister. I am his sister. But I was like a little mother, and that loss, it's very deep. It really is a very deep loss. I think also we were very lucky that we were with him when he died. I think to lose someone in a car accident or in a way that you have no control over, but we were there, we were with him. That's a really special thing, to be allowed that.
And do you remember growing up your mother reading you stories, or was story? Yeah. I know writing's always been a huge part of your life from a very young age, but how has storytelling been part of your family life or your family culture?
So my family is quite an artistic family. My father, really very creative musician. He used to restore pianos. He could play the violin, played the piano. I have a recording of him playing with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra as a young man. But he was also a very complicated person. He probably had borderline personality disorder. I don't know. Just sort of looking back and what we know about things now, I would say probably he did. I don't know, something like that. Because of that, there was always before my parents separated, there was always classical music in the house. There was always pianos and piano action and, all sort of stuff going on to do with music. And my father was very into the newest thing. So he would be bringing home the video camera and recording us. And, I have footage that he's taken from the 70s of like parades and stuff that he's filmed on his camera. So he was extremely creative. My mother would say that she's not, but I disagree because she's actually a really beautiful writer herself. She's much more refined, but she played piano and, so there was always that. And my house is just full of books. It was just full of books. I was always reading well above my age level, age group. And it was a huge part of my life. I would get books for Christmas. I'd get books as presents. And, my mother would read with me. And as a result, I'm, obsessed with reading and books. And I've usually got a few books on the go.
My 10-year-old still loves me reading stories to him. What
so does my 12-year-old.
I think it is about that magic of a parent reading to their child, that safety and security they get when they sit in a parent's lap. Because I often get asked by my kids to read books, and I'm so happy that they still ask me. But do you think that significance has fallen away since iPads and Kindle books and the electronic mediums that are available to kids now?
No, I just think that kids adapt to the new medium of receiving the story. I think it's the magic of imagination, and there's something really comforting for children and adults to go into a world of imagination, which could be, I'm the superhero, I'm that little person, I'm the princess, I'm the kid with the super mum. That's why people love movies, that's why people love books, that's why people love TV shows. Everybody's watching The Crown because a part of them thinks, oh, I'm the royalty. People walk into that world And I think that that's a very special thing, and it probably releases endorphins and makes you feel great, and it's a deeper connection. And I think it's kind of a mystical, magical thing that probably some amazing psychologist has done a thesis about. You know,
often about getting it wrong though. How do I start the story? Getting it wrong, having a funny voice, things like that. But I mean, that certainly was something I was worried about. Like, what if I get it wrong? What if I, we question ourselves so much as parents, I guess. But I think it's important for parents just to realize, just pick up a book. It doesn't matter what book it is. Kids just love being able to sit down with their parents, especially when.
Yeah, look, there's no right or wrong to reading. Just what I always said to my children, doesn't matter if you go to university. People might think I'm really strange, but I've always said to my kids, it doesn't actually matter if you go to university, and it doesn't actually even matter if you don't finish high school. But the one thing that you must learn to do in order to be able to teach yourself anything is to read. And my youngest son, my youngest stepson, really struggled to learn to read, whereas the other three just, Lexi was reading by 3. I would just say to people to be encouraged, to not feel discouraged if your child is struggling with reading.
That's especially with how much pressure is on both the student and the parents now. We have NAPLAN, they're constantly tested. So I think that idea of falling in love with the joy of reading is something that's really important. Yeah. Interesting point though, in terms of how you parent your stepchildren or when you become a blended family. So what was it like? What was your family story like, and how did you explain that to both, for want of a better word, because I'm sure they're all your children, but for your biological children, and the story for your stepchildren?
Yeah. Well, so my husband and I, when we met, because we were in our 40s and already had kids and already had failed relationships, we knew really quickly that there was something very special between us. And we knew that we were going to spend our life together very quickly. And we sat down, and he had very different parenting style to me. And I said to him, if we're going to have a relationship, we need to be on the same page when it comes to parenting, because I can't have 2 families in the same house with me doing naughty corner and beds at 7:30 and, reading before bed and all these sorts of things, and you giving the kids popcorn for dinner.
That difference in parenting styles is so important, and the difference in how that then leads to those stories being told about how you separated and the new relationships that are forming when a family, blended family.
Yeah, he's a beautiful father. Like he's so loving and patient and kind and caring. I mean, he really is a beautiful father. And I would say that I'm the strict one. I'm the one on a Sunday who says, right, we're all cleaning the house. And they're 8, 10 and 12. Our daughters are the same age. But when they got together, the children just, particularly Roxy, who was 7, we went over to Sol's house. This is before we moved in together, and she'd made a little letter, and it said, "Dear Lexi, every night I've been wishing for a sister for as long as I could remember. And then Dad met Bronny, and now I've got you."
That is adorable.
So they are sisters. They very much connect as sisters. When they're not together, they're texting each other and playing games virtually, and they're 12, I had rules about that. I believe in the age group. If it says you can't do it till you're 13, then you can't do it till you're 13 in my house. So much to the children's, can't we watch Stranger Things? No.
But did you set that up in the sense that, did you workshop or did you read to them, or was that part of your story to normalize it, to get your daughter to that point?
Yeah. So what we did was, I mean, I spoke to Alexis separately. She'd sort of seen me have some relationships already, tried and failed. But with Soledad, what we did was, we have a rule in our house, which is if there's conflict, we all sit at the table and we have like a talking thing, might be the tomato sauce bottle, that's your talking thing. And you've got to put your hand up and then you get the sauce bottle and then you can talk. So we did a lot of working through things that came up, lots and lots and lots of it. So we don't really have to sit at the dinner table that much anymore. But in those first, they say it takes 5 years for a blended family to settle. We're coming up for 5 years and I can see that we're actually very settled now. So I can really understand that. But we used to, if there was a problem, we would address it immediately. We'd sit at the table as a family and we would talk about it. And like all couples, sometimes we have arguments. But what we would do is we'd have our argument. Maybe one of us might go for a walk around the block. And then we would sit at the table and say to the children, we want you to understand that just because we have had an argument, that we're not getting divorced.
The reassurance.
Yeah, that we made a decision to have a life together and to blend our families, and that this is our family and that we're not getting divorced. So you don't need to worry. So now what happens is when we have an argument, the children laugh. I think it's funny because it's ridiculous usually. It doesn't happen very often, but, you know, we've had some ridiculous arguments about ridiculous things and then we look at it later and laugh.
And what's
like
like everyone, that's exactly right. But what's the question I was going to ask is, what's the advice you would give? Because you've gone through being a single mum, you have grown up in a single parent household as well, and you've now have a blended family. So what advice would you give, for example, to somebody who hasn't separated yet but is thinking about it, somebody who is going through that process, and somebody who's in your position now where they're in a blended family? Because I think you have a really unique perspective because you've been through all these different stages of your life, but you've also, I mean, we were speaking earlier about how your experiences as a single parent, it certainly wasn't like it is now. Your life was very different.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I became a mother, you know, they say through great tragedy or drama comes great things. I had a de facto relationship and pardon me. I had a de facto relationship and we went through some problems around the 4-year mark, and then we separated, and then we got back together, and then I fell pregnant. And one of the problems in our relationship had been that we had different timelines for having babies. And when we broke up the first time, he came to me and said, let's have a baby. And I said I wouldn't have a baby unless some other things occurred first, which he wasn't willing to do. So when he came back to me and said, let's have a baby, and I said, have you done all these things? And he said, no. I was like, well, my line in the sand remains. So when I fell pregnant 18 months later after we tried again, to me, that was the baby. There was always meant to be a baby. But he had decided by that stage that he'd moved on from this relationship, or had he, I don't know, but I was given an ultimatum, me or the baby.
Oh, wow.
So I chose the baby.
And how old were you when you made that decision?
34.
Wow. So you would have had a flourishing career.
I was an executive in the arts industry, in the arts and entertainment world. You know, I had my eye set on being chief executive of the Arts Centre, was where I thought I was going. That's where I wanted to go, like to run one of these institutions. I was certainly on my way to that type of thing. And then I fell pregnant and I had a decision to make, which was, am I going to have this baby? Well, I knew that I would. It was no question to me.
And to go through that, and then did you continue working?
No, so what happened was I kept working and, you know, growing and all the rest of it. And then and it was very stressful. And in fact, I told my daughter this because I want her to feel good about being here. And even though he doesn't speak to us, I want her to feel good about him. I told her that when we were in our relationship, we were the goals couple. Everyone used to say, oh, I want to be like you and him. They would always say that. And in fact, when we broke up, people were devastated. Oh, I thought you were the ones that were going to last forever. I wanted to be like you. People were really upset about it. So I wanted her to know that she came from love, from two people that loved each other. And I said to her that it's the same for my husband and his ex-wife, that those children came from love, from two people who loved each other, and they wanted those children. And even though my relationship with her father hadn't worked and my husband's relationship with his ex-wife hadn't worked, at one point in time, we had both thought our relationships were perfect and we were very in love, and the children came as a result of that. And that even though now we're together, even though now that we're together and we're the family, that she should know that the children have come from love.
And that's an incredibly child-focused way to be. And it's hard. It's hard as a parent when you're in that dynamic. It's hard. It's really hard. It requires courage and being able to put aside your own personal feelings for the benefit of your child, because the worst thing is that when somebody denigrates the other parent, because that's half of your child right there.
I said to her, in a perfect world, on Christmas Day, we'd have the kids' mum had come over and we'd open the bottle of wine, and then your dad had come over with his family, and and then the kids' uncles had come over and we'd all be together. I said, in my perfect world, that's how that would look. But unfortunately, there's two other parties. That's not what it looks like. They're not ready to do that. They're just not ready to do that for whatever reason. And that's okay, because, I imagine sometimes that it would be very hard. In fact, I know it's hard, because it was hard for me when I saw my daughter's father in that new relationship and I was the single mother. It sucked. And then when they had their first baby, and then when they had their second, a part of me was thinking that should be me having the second baby. That should be me having the third baby. And it was very hard for me, very hard. But then I came to acceptance. I thought, oh, no, that's their story. That's what's meant to happen. And that's beautiful, because I don't have to go through pregnancy again. Lexi's got two sisters. Thank you. It's a blessing.
That's a really good point, though, is that at various times the roles you play in other people's stories will be very different. I think that's a really interesting way to look at life as well. And I think it's really interesting how you're explaining that process to your daughter as well.
Yeah. And I just always say to my stepchildren, we don't call our kids stepkids as the first thing. It's just, they're just our kids.
Yeah.
And that's why I wrote Super Soul Dad, because I wanted to create the idea that sometimes families are formed because your soul needs that. They're meant to be a part of your soul. So they're like soul kids. Like, I didn't give birth to you, but you're my soul kid, or my soul parent. And, I've often said to the children, well, not often, but enough over the years so that they know that actually I really wanted a big family and I really wanted a lot of kids. So when I met their dad, it was like the happiest day ever, because my dream came true of having a really big family. And I have said to them, I don't think your mummy knows just how special she is, because she gave me one of the biggest gifts ever. She gave me my 3 extra kids. I'm so blessed.
That's a really beautiful way to explain that step family dynamic, I think. I haven't heard that phrase, soul parent, before. I really like it.
Yeah. Well, so that's my Super Soul Dad, is all about a stepfather and his little girl at the beach, and, having their life and riding bikes and, doing all these sorts of things. So I think I might even have that book around.
What do you think is the most important point for separated parents or solo parents?
Yeah, that's right. So I was actually going to say, before you sort of asked me that question before, I think if you're planning on leaving, first of all, I do think that sometimes we quit on relationships that could be saved. And relationships are meant to be full of ups and downs, and good years and bad years. But if there's any red flags that relate to abuse of children or parental abuse, or, you know, and that could be anything, it could be emotional abuse, you know, things like telling your partner that they're unattractive or they shouldn't leave the house dressed like that, or God, you've really gotten fat, you know, emotional abuse, abuse of finances, and, you know, there's a lot of sort of
different aspects of family violence.
right, yeah, that, and somebody is in that situation and they sort of think, no, I can't get through it, that they need to make a plan. And particularly if they're in an abusive relationship, and I have had to leave a particularly abusive relationship where the person ended up killing themselves. And because I have already separated before, I knew that I needed to make a plan. And it's actually really important. You need to make a plan, and you need to tell those around you closest, and you need to bring them in to help you.
That's right.
And if you need the police, then you need to involve the police quickly and make them aware of the plan as well. And then you should squirrel away as much money as you can, and be prepared to leave, so that you know that person's, whatever they're doing, like if you can somehow manipulate them into going away for a weekend, you should go have a boys' weekend. I know you should. I know you need it. You need it. You really need that time out. Get them out of the house, get them away, and then you enact your plan. And then they can come home and you'll be the worst person on earth because you did whatever you did. It doesn't matter. If you're safe and your children are safe, that's all that matters. And then the other thing I would say is if it's just that for whatever reason, you know, maybe you had a great relationship and then he had an affair and you just can't move forward with that. I mean, that's not a great thing, but it does happen. You know, that if you can be amicable, it's children first.
Yeah.
It's not what do I want. It's what do my children want. Children will always say more time with their parent. They will always say more time with their parent. If your child says, I don't want to go to dad's, I am scared of going to dad's, then of course you do everything in your power to not do that. Or mums, you know, it goes both ways. But, you know, I just think that, you know, when Soledad and I make decisions, like we've had lots of things happen. And when it comes to the crux of it, we say, what would the children want us to do? And then that's what we do.
Your family culture is bringing them into those family discussions about conflict and communication as well. So that's something that very early on, when we speak about passing around the sauce bottle, that's something very early on that you've established in your family culture. And that's part of your family story in terms of how things have progressed to the point where you're now 5 years in.
Yeah. I always remember we had this situation in the house where my eldest son something had happened, and between the two boys, I think he might have done something to Cohen. But I remember he was sitting at the table and I had the sauce bottle, and I said, I want you to know that you're so important to your little brother, that you are his hero, that every time he looks at you, all he wants is to be like Orson. And Orson burst into tears.
Oh, wow.
And I said, here's the sauce bottle. Oh, that's not true. I am not important. I am not the most important person in this family. Nobody listens to me. Nobody cares about and he really let loose. And this is a very reserved child, a child that could quite happily, if you didn't talk to him all day, probably wouldn't talk. He's just very reserved. He lives in his head. That's okay. He comes out of it plenty, you know, put him on the game, PlayStation, and God, he's so noisy. You know, all I hear is Orson screaming and yelling and laughing. But, you know, in general, he's a reserved child. That's just his personality. So when he did this big,
let loose.
Yeah, like he took the sauce bottle back and no, that's not true. You are so important. You are equally important. And your brother loves you. Don't you? Sauce bottle? Yes. You know, like I just think that children need to know that they're loved, they're valued, they need to feel safe, they need to feel secure. And that starts with the adults in their life modelling the behaviours for them to take into the future. So if we act like children with each other, how do we expect children to act, you know, if we can't sort things out amongst ourselves and behave like adults, you know.
That's a perfect place to end our interview with you. That's such an important message, and I hope that gets out. But thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Again, a single dad, and we'll provide a whole heap of links for everybody to go off and learn more about you, Bronny. But thank you so much, and I hope you have a good day.
Thank you. You too. Thanks so much for having me.